Hi, hello. My name is Gibson. Thank you so much for joining us at the Charles M. Schulz Museum. The Doctor is in Exploring Mental Health Through Comics program today. I can't wait to introduce you to this amazing panel. After we hear from our panelists, we will have time for some questions. So please be sure to submit your questions in the Q&A function. Now I'm really excited to introduce to you Dr. Ian Williams, our moderator. Dr. Ian Williams is a cartoonist, writer, and doctor who lives in Brighton in the UK. His first graphic novel, The Bad Doctor, was published, or about a general practitioner suffering from OCD, was published in 2014 and followed up in 2019 by The Lady Doctor. Both were critically acclaimed, and he is working on his third, previously entitled The Sick Doctor. He named the area of study called Graphic Medicine, building the famed website in 2007, which he currently co-edits. He is the founder of the not-for-profit Graphic Medicine International Collective and co-author of the Eisner-nominated Graphic Medicine Manifesto. Williams defines graphic medicine as anything that happens or is happening at the interface between the medium in comics and the discourse of healthcare. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ian Williams.
Thank you, Gibson. It's great to be here this evening. The panel this evening is fantastic. They are three cartoonists that I really admire. Brick, also known as John Stuart Clark, is the creator of the graphic novel Depresso, amongst other works. Brick was nominated for 2 of the USA's Eisner Award for Best Comic Anthology and Best Reality-Based Work. He studied film at art school, but after many jobs, including a taxi driver, bouncer, roadie, scrapman, and general layabout, he became a cartoonist. And in 2015, he became an honorary associate professor of English at the University of Nottingham. Ellen Forney is an author, artist, teacher, and mental health coach. Her work includes the New York Times best-selling graphic memoir, Marbles, Mania, Depression, Michelangelo and Me, the story of her diagnosis and struggle with bipolar disorder, and its companion book, Rock Steady, Brilliant Advice from My Bipolar Life, a handbook for mental health. She curated Graphic Medicine, Ill-Conceived and Well-Drawn, a traveling exhibition on comics and health for the National Library of Medicine, and has given talks and lectures internationally at universities, conferences, and institutions, including her TED Talk, Finding Balance in Bipolar. Gemma Correll is a cartoonist, writer, and illustrator who often explores themes of anxiety and depression and general angst in her wry and observant work. She's written several books, including The Warrior's Guide to Life, A Pug's Guide to Etiquette, and the Feminist Activity book. A crazy number of followers on social media. Her favorite color is red, and her favorite word is Albuquerque. Now, normally we would have, like in a live event, we would have a round of applause now for our panelists, but I'm really glad to invite everybody. We can't hear the audience, unfortunately. So I'm going to kick off with the questions. My first question really to everyone is, well, you all lay yourselves bare on the page, really, so to speak, putting your experience of mental health out there in the form of comics. Why do this? Why write and draw about mental health? I'm going to ask Ellen to start, please. Ellen, you're muted.
Hey, here's me and my voice going. All right. So happy to be here, and so happy to be here with these panelists, and so nice to see you again. Okay. So I think one of the questions really in there is, why do it for the public? I think for me, as someone who draws and writes, I've been doing journaling and sketching for myself for a long time. It is a way for me to get my feelings out, to kind of to get them outside of me so I can really kind of figure out what's going on, like why it is that we journal. And then why it is that I wanted to share this was really kind of is almost kind of a different story. I mean, I feel like I have this medium where I can, that I can use. I feel like it's a difficult experience for a lot of people, and that I've come to a place where I can express it outside of myself to give people company in my story. And I think one of the things about comics is that we're telling stories, and that's a way that a lot of people really come to understand things, and a personal story, and then kind of allow my experience, you know, where I've come to then be a possibility for something that they might be able to understand or use or do something different. But
and you were a cartoonist before you decided to write about your experiences, yeah? How long were you doing comics before you brought out you drew marbles?
Well, I mean, I could say that I've been a cartoonist all my life. I mean, I've always drawn and told stories and enjoyed writing, and so putting them together has been something that kind of developed through as long as I can remember. I became a professional cartoonist, like sold my first comic in my early 20s. So I had been doing comics for a long time and had really come to know the medium, and had been teaching comics at a College of Arts here, Cornish College of the Arts here in Seattle for a number of years before tackling what was, you know, like by far the most big and difficult project that I had and have probably done.
And Gemma, how about you? How did you start? I mean, you deal with lots of kind of material in your illustrations and comics. When did you? At what point did you start including mental health issues in there?
Well, again, one of the reasons I do it is like Ellen, for personal reasons, and so I've always journaled and made comics as I was a kid, and I would make little kind of diary drawings about my personal life, including my mental health, and I've been making those since I was a teenager, and I decided to share a couple of them on social media, which is where a lot of my audience are. It was actually a teacher, a professor at my art school who encouraged me to kind of share my more personal work. And I was inspired by a lot of comic artists like Ellen, like Jeffrey Brown, people like that, who were sharing their more personal comics. And I just thought, I'll try and see what happens. And then I saw that a lot of people responded to it. So, you know, it's part for myself and part to share my story with other people, and, you know, hope that it resonates.
And how did you find the feedback once you started putting those personal stories out there?
Generally good. I was actually surprised at how many people related to them, because this is something I've just been doing kind of on my own, keeping to myself for such a long time. I kind of thought, well, I'm the only one who feels like this. I'd never really been exposed to other people who had the same issues as me, or knowingly at least. But suddenly I was seeing all these people responding to them positively for the most part. And I think mental illness can make you feel very alone. So it was helpful for me personally, and for other people to see that there were so many other people experiencing the same things.
And Brick, you had a career, I mean, a lot of your work is very political, or working for protest sort of movements. What made you decide to bare your soul and your psyche in long form of a graphic novel?
I mean, you're right. Most of my work has been political and for newspapers, magazines, and stuff like that. And essentially, you're commenting on a mad world. So when the madness becomes yours, you sort of, whoa, you know, it's a bit of a shock. But the reason I did it was, just as Ellen said, is essentially for myself, because people had said keeping a diary during your crisis can help. And people are very generous. They let me read their diaries. But I think if you're in the media, you're automatically, your kind of editing facilities immediately kick in. And nothing needs editing more than the comic. So I essentially used the comic form as a way of just keeping a track on what the hell was going on with me and going on around me. And then at some point or other, I showed it to Hunt Emerson, who's, I guess, Britain's best known underground cartoonist. And he said, this stuff's wonderful. And of course, I've never drawn personal stuff. I've always drawn political stuff. So that was a bit of a shock. And then from that point onwards, I just forged my diary into something that was a cogent book, which he then took to a publisher.
And so all three of you, by the sound of it, have found it very helpful to do this, both as a sort of self-examination and putting your thoughts in order. This is the perennial question, I guess, and many people assume that making a work like this is cathartic. It's a complex question and everybody has a different answer, but I'm going to ask you, three of you, do you think that making work about yourself has a kind of healing aspect to it? Who would like
well, you
to...
know, because this question comes up a lot, I actually looked up like the definition of catharsis.
Right.
And it's not actually as ultimate as we usually, you know, like, is it, you know, like cathartic, did it change your life? When really it's, okay, I can tell you, it's providing psychological relief through the open expression of strong emotions. And yes, I mean, yes, like throughout the whole thing, for sure, you know, like one catharsis after another. I mean, it's like a really, there's a sense of satisfaction of getting it down and kind of like figuring out and making it a story. Like, even if it's a story that you just tell, you know, like something really bothersome that happened at the supermarket. Somebody insulted you. I don't know. You dropped something and you were embarrassed. And then if you can take that to someone and even just tell that story, you know, like you get a sense of relief by just kind of getting some perspective on that. And certainly if you can add some humor in there, I think that we all kind of like add a little humor in there, right? Yeah. I mean, then you can especially get kind of, I guess, power over it, like something that has been something that in that context made you feel either vulnerable or weak. If you can turn it around and like take it on as your own, it's a very powerful feeling and definitely a relief. Definitely, certainly.
Gemma, Brick, how do you feel about the making of the work?
Gemma, you go.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with Ellen again. I think that humor and comics in particular are a great coping mechanism. And for me personally, I have trouble articulating my feelings verbally. So I've always used words and images to express myself. And even like in specific circumstances, like going to the doctor to speak about mental health and not having the words to tell them about it, of being able to just write it down and just give them the piece of paper and say, this is how I'm feeling.
So yeah, it's.
Did they appreciate that? Did they like that?
Well, I mean, otherwise I was just crying. So at least it was better than 10 minutes appointment of me.
But no, I'm just thinking that you might produce something really amazing to give them. So
Yes. Well, can I have that back?
Yes. Or charge them for it, like
right.
So.
There you go.
Yeah. Great. No, I didn't find it cathartic at all. I find it bum numbing, basically. I did find it a relief. I agree with people on that. I think once I got it down as script and thumbnails, it was done. To then have to sit down and go back to my job in the middle of crisis was dreadful. The one thing it did do is it kept me busy and it kept me off the fags. Cigarettes, sorry, can't say fags with Americans around. Yeah, it kept me off the cigarettes, but no, I didn't find it cathartic. I mean, a couple of things happened to me that were cathartic, but they had nothing to do with sitting at a drawing board 8 hours a day.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people forget about that, just how difficult and long process of making, comics, making a graphic novel is.
Well, I guess along that score, though, for me, certainly, I mean, I think it's an interesting I don't know, from an interesting part of doing comics. Is how long the production is. I was talking with a writer friend yesterday about the process of our books, and when she gets to like the edited transcript, she's like done, and I'm like half done, and for the most part, I agree. It's kind of like, okay, now I've got this. Now I've got it to the thumbnail stage. Now I have to, like make it tighter, and then I have to ink it, and then I have to do the whole rest of the process. For me, Marbles was pretty intense the whole way. I felt like I was continually translating the way that things felt into how they looked. And what the experience was like. I mean, there was so much emotion that went into all of the art, and just the process of drawing. I draw by hand, and I mean, as opposed to digitally, and that whole process of going through all of it again was I mean, the whole thing, I would say, had some sort of emotional resonance. It doesn't always, but definitely, certainly the stuff that I do around mental health.
And I guess all three of you are, I mean, there are so many interesting questions about the whole process of like drawing yourselves repeatedly over a period of time. Do you feel that sort of, again, to all three of you, do you feel that sort of putting yourself in there as a cartoon, does that alter somehow? Does that sort of reconfigure the way you feel about yourself, or about your body, or about your mind?
Can I go?
Yes, please do.
The thing I most enjoyed about the process was taking the piss out of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, given that we all use humor to some extent, or irony, or whatever, you go through mental distress and it destroys you, and it takes you right down, and then you think, well, actually, this is quite a good place to look at myself and prick as many bubbles about my ego as possible. So that element of it I enjoyed, and I really enjoyed putting my character, who's not, it is me, but he's called Tom Freeman, putting him through hell, because all the time I was stripping away the kind of the bullshit that we all take on board, if you're with me. So that part of it I loved. Yeah, I had great fun with that.
And all three of you use humor. I mean, Gemma mentioned humor and finding that a useful way to articulate things. Why is humor a good way to approach mental health? And what is it about comics that allows us to explore it with humor or irony?
I think that mental health can seem like such a huge, massive alien thing, and comics are a really great way of kind of getting down to the basics and expressing how things feel. And for me personally, I kind of try and simplify things down a little bit so it doesn't seem so scary, or like it's something that you're the only person experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really important point, is taking something that's really big and simplifying it. That's a lot of what comics is too, like both visually in the lines and what it is that we're talking about, and making it handleable. And then also taking what we usually get is very clinical, dry, overwhelming, kind of sad, hopeless kind of information, and filling it out and giving it a context. I think especially in personal stories, and then also for sure in stories that are, Ian, I know that yours is a personal story, Good Doctor, although you took a step away and made you a fictional character.
Yeah, it's kind of fictionalized, and the character in it is has my experiences, I suppose. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's getting away from humor. I mean, I think humor allows us to have a perspective on something that is difficult to take in. I mean, the analogy that I bring up sometimes is why it is that so many of us get our news much more easily from the Daily Show or Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live is more dealing with the issues, but then like the news itself, but Weekend Update, whatever. Anyway, just to get that information with very often there's like a metaphor, some other perspective, because it's a kind of sidestep, like a political cartoon. Like, this is just like the way a kitten and a puppy would interact. It allows us to understand it. It allows us to laugh at something with someone else, because somebody has created it, somebody has published it, and so all of us are laughing at whatever that scary thing is. I know it's a really important coping mechanism for me to be able to take something that was difficult for me, and I guess, like I said, kind of take charge of that. Like, this is my story, and I can take charge of this. Gemma, I think that you do an awesome job of that, like picking details that are difficult, like the things that you wear over and over, at home, or like certain ways that things feel, and like picking out a detail and then just saying, and then laughing at it. And, not saying that it's not true, but being able to get some perspective on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if you start looking at mental health, especially as a beginner, there's just so much. And, obviously you're going to focus on the major things. But there's so many little things that you might not even realize that you do. And I like to kind of to concentrate sometimes on those little things and, make fun of them a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Gemma, I mean, you, most of your work is sort of short form, if you like, as opposed to, graphic novels. And your work is brilliant, and I love the kind of details. And I think that work is kind of instantly appealing and entertaining and very funny to people. And, maybe, people sort of find that they can kind of dip their toes in, sort of, because you're being kind of like self-mocking and ironic, and it's funny, but it's sort of within one cartoon, it's sort of containing a whole kind of depth of like backstory, if you like, and ways that could be gone. You must have, so on your Instagram, you've got so many followers. You must have kind of like, you must spend most of your time reading kind of like comments and things like that. If people I've never looked at your comment stream, but it must be very long. Do you interact with your audience a lot?
I mean, I do somewhat, but it's kind of impossible to interact with everybody. I wouldn't get to do anything else. But I do try to, especially when someone's, you know, tapping into a certain part of the comic, or, you know, sometimes people will ask for help, and that's not my expertise or my job, but I try and direct them into the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
Ellen, you're a mental health coach, aren't you? So what does that entail?
Well, so I'd heard from readers for years, and then kind of like what Gemma was just saying, who really connected and then have questions or want to share something. And so after years of kind of wanting to interact with people on a more individual level, like to be able to spend a little more time and attention, I realized, and my psychiatrist actually had suggested to me a couple of times that I be a coach. And then I just decided, after putting out Rocksteady, which is my book on, it's like a handbook on mental health, also in comics, but kind of like everything that I know, but it's like a textbook, it's like a handbook. And I realized, you know, like, well, I have this program and I have all these people that I have wanted to connect with and have wanted to connect with me. So maybe it's time for me to do that. So I started a practice as a mental health coach, and I'm really enjoying it. I really feel like I'm able to help in a different way.
How many clients do you have, or what? How do you do it?
Well,
or is it like you have individual clients, or do you interact with? How does it work?
It's individual clients. Like, people can, I mean, they go through the nitty gritty, you know, like they have a rocksteadycoach.com.
Right. Okay.
There's like information and the application, and just see if they're in the right place for it. Because I mean, the work that I do is kind of like for the, I mean, Rocksteady, the book, I mean, I have it right here. I'll just grab it.
I've got it here.
Yeah. So it's also in comics form. I guess that was what the slide was that she showed. And it's for people who are anywhere from figuring out what their hour. I mean, like, I have bipolar, and I am still dealing with it, you know, 24/7. I have to figure out, I've been stable since 2002. So I've figured something out. And I mean, and when it kind of relates to the first question that you asked too, which is why do you tell your story? Why do you share what you do? Why do you share what it is that you share? And for me, I kind of felt, in a way, it was almost my responsibility for, you know, having come to where I've come in figuring out how to deal with myself and everything that I've learned, because I love doing research, and I love psychology, to share that. And then also, I mean, I could go on, but I'll stop with this, that Rocksteady really, to me, is the companion book, kind of the sequel to Marbles. It's a thing that has become more and more important to me, actually, as more and more of us have the opportunity to tell our stories, and stories of trauma, and stories of difficult things that we're going through. And Marbles is really focusing on that. But then once we have that sense that we're not alone, which I think is really key, then what? Okay, so we're not alone, and where do we take that? Where can we take that together? Where can we take that individually? excuse me. So that's where Rocksteady comes in, and that's one of the things, Gemma, too. When I was looking at your again, I mean, like, you know, I'm one of your many followers, but that so much of your work is about how difficult it is, and kind of laughing at that. But then also, I mean, some of it is I know sponsored by other mental health organizations, but it really is included in your work that there's hope, and there are things that you can do, and there are resources, and that, I think, is a huge part as advocates for us to say, you're not alone, and there are things that you can do, and here are some of them.
What's Gemma, what's been the have you had any sort of standout feedback, if you like, from your followers or interaction?
I don't know if there's anything that particularly stands out. I think that people who have said, kind of echoing how I felt when I was a little younger, that they've been able to just take one of my comics to their doctor or psychologist or whoever and say how I feel. So in the same way that I can articulate myself, that if they're unable to articulate how they're feeling, it's really good to hear that my comics help them do that.
Yeah, well, there's I mean, I think when I read it, there's plenty that I instantly identify with. We've got a couple of minutes to go before the Q&A. As you know, this is hosted by the Schulz Museum. I want to touch, yeah.
Can we go back to discussing why comic form?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Charles Schulz, but yes, let's do that, Brick.
I just think it might help the people who are watching this.
Yeah.
If we talked about that a bit. I mean, one of the great things about the comic form is that you can have more than one voice operating at the same time, which is something that's very, very difficult to do in prose narrative. Pretty difficult to do in film unless you use split screens, and also obviously difficult to do in anything that is a temporal form. In comics, you can have as many voices going as you can fit on the page, and if people get lost, it actually doesn't matter too much because they don't have to buy another ticket and go again and watch it. They just flick back, and I think that's one of the great things about the form relative to mental health issues, because we all have conflicting voices going on inside our minds. That's where the humor is coming from. So that's why this is such a good form. And I wonder what people feel about that.
Yeah, and I guess different planes of reality, as well as sort of multiple voices, different planes of reality. I mean, the basic, you know, feature of the comic is that you can see somebody's thoughts and hear their speech at the same time. But
oh
my God, you can make huge jumps, and take the reader with you very easily. Visual jumps, narrative jumps, whatever. So it has unique qualities.
Yeah, Ellen.
There's so many reasons that I love comics as a medium in general, that I think it's really powerful to be able to combine words and pictures, the kinds of kind of more abstract feelings that you can get across from the drawing style. And I use a lot of different drawing styles myself to get across different kinds of information, things that are more technical or things that are more goofy. Certainly in drawing, you know, Mania and drawing Depression were, you know, very different. You can use visual metaphors really easily and just like kind of drop that in. I know one of the parts of marbles that has been, I don't know, reproduced more than I think anything is the carousel, to show the different mood states and how they go up and down. So to be able to come up with explanations like that, and to be able to just kind of like pop those in. People understand pictures. It's really, comics are really good for people who have dyslexia, because there are more cues for the meaning. When we're talking about mental health, people who are in any sort of agitated state or manic or depressed, having a book that has generally much more open pages than just text is just much easier to read. Somebody who had attention deficit told me that my book was the first book that they had read in years. And I believe it. And I hope that led them to comics in general, and not just my book. But I think for mental health, it really gets across emotion in a way that's very powerful.
I don't think I've ever given a talk, Ellen, without showing at least one or two panels from Marbles, because there's just so many good things in there. And I was going to mention, I mean, you mentioned sort of different ways of, drawing yourself in different states or whatever. I mean, the way that all three of you articulate your mood through bodily posture as well within comics. What springs to mind, with Brick, the front of Depresso sort of shows you or Tom, hunched up on a, I've got it here, hunched up on a step. Everybody knows exactly what your mood is there.
One of the things that we have in this country is you have to wait an awfully long time to be seen by a professional. And I'm not talking, months, I'm talking years. So if you're, doing this, in my case, diary style book, how do you get across that length of time that you're having to wait? And I spent ages scratching my head thinking, well, I can't just have lots of pages of him, thinking like that. So I just I thought of a list of all the famous scenes in movies where people are sat waiting, right? And it could be The Great Escape with Steve McQueen throwing the baseball against the wall type of thing, et cetera, et cetera. And I just put a page and more of quotes from movies, but I am the person who's in that. And the number of people who say, I know exactly what you're talking about there. So that's those sort of references that we can pull in. And I use a lot of music references. I mean, the front cover to Sgt. Pepper's, et cetera, et cetera. That's what's great about our form, is we can steal from all over the place and customize it for ourselves.
Except song lyrics, but
and also when there are cultural references, I have to say it gets complicated for foreign editions and translating them. Like
that's where you just have to be very careful. You have to know that these are world famous images,
Yeah. And Brick is very well traveled as well, so hopefully you Brick, tell us about, we've got a few minutes left before the Q&A. I believe did you meet Charles Schulz?
Yes, I had the honor of meeting Sparky. His nickname was Sparky. I cycled across America 150 years after the men and women set out for the gold rush, the California gold rush. And I wanted to do it as a way to understand what the American dream was. So I was doing my cowboy fantasy, if you like. And when I got to the far side, I went to see my agent in California, a guy called Mark Cohen. He said, well, since you're here, you might as well come and meet Sparky. I had no idea who Sparky was. And it was the great man himself in his own personal, private stroke public ice hockey arena, his own stadium. What? And he took us in to watch a seniors hockey match. He was obsessed with ice hockey. And as we were coming in, the first thing was that all these people were trying to interest him in investing in this and investing in that. And he said, no, you don't get it. He said, I draw silly pictures. I send them away and they send me money. That's it. I don't know anything about money. When we sat down, he turned to me and he said, are you going to draw pictures of your journey? And I said, I don't know. And he said, I can't draw bicycles. And since you're here, how do you draw a London telephone box? This is Charles Schulz, who's turning to me and saying, how do you draw a London telephone box? Sparky, it's a box. It's got windows. That's it. And he gave us. So this has traveled on my bicycle all the way through California, Death Valley, and all the rest of it. Isn't that lovely of him? Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question, I think, before we go to Q&A. There's probably lots of people in the audience who maybe wonder, I mean, everybody's had such an interesting kind of career trajectory. So there must be people in the audience wondering how, maybe you become a cartoonist. I'd like to ask Gemma, because you, when you went to university, you didn't study comics, did you? You studied graphic design, I think. And then what was your, to use an example, I suppose, what was your career trajectory into doing what you do now?
Well, I had always been into comics and making comics when I was little. I would, my brother would get the Beano, and then I would get Bunty, the magazine for girls. But I would mostly read my brother's Beano. To be honest, I didn't know much about comics, and I changed my mind a bunch of times about what I wanted to study. So these comics and these journals that I was making were just kind of natural for me. I didn't consider that would actually be a career path for myself. I didn't know really that it could be. So in the end, I ended up studying this graphic design course because it had a bunch of different options. You could do photography, animation, and in the end, I settled on illustration. And while there, I started looking at artists who were very popular at the time, who combined pictures and words in what you would call comics. So people like Tom Gold, Simone Lear, a lot of the British artists who worked for places like The Guardian and newspapers. And then again, it was just like personal work that I didn't consider could actually be my job. And then it kind of just naturally happened over the years that as much as I tried to be a proper illustrator, which is what I thought that people wanted, more and more my personal work was getting noticed, and I was actually getting asked to make that rather than the proper illustration, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do mostly now? Do you do more kind of, you cover a vast range of subjects in your work. I can see why the personal work appeals very much. What do you feel the balance is now? Do you feel you're heading towards making more personal work? Yes,
I'm definitely trying to. The great thing about social media, although it is a double-edged sword very much, is that I've been able to share the personal work, and a lot of the time I get commissioned to make work based off of that. So for other brands or for companies, like the BBC, I did something for their body positive campaign and for their GCSE bite size. So I really enjoy doing that, and I am actually trying to work on a graphic novel at the moment.
Excellent. Can you tell us more, or is it a secret?
It's not a secret. It's about anxiety, surprise, and it's it's a challenge for me to do a longer story, a longer narrative, but I've been able to kind of break it up into sections by using visual metaphors. In this case, a kind of like theme park metaphor, which is an excuse for me to go to Disneyland a lot.
Excellent. When's it going to be out?
Hopefully in less than a year.
Cool.
Excellent.
Has it got a title?
Right now it's called Anxiety Land.
Brilliant. Well, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, me too.
Well, thank you all. I think that we're going to go to Q&A because we've got a load of questions from the audience. So I'm going to hand over to Gibson, who's going to...
Yeah, so lovely. We do have a lot of questions from our audience today. I just wanted to start with asking you all about how did Peanuts influence you and your comic style?
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, just how did the Peanuts influence you and your comic style? Am I cutting out?
Yeah, no. I guess Peanuts was just, it's just kind of a part of my life from we used to get the Sunday funnies, and Peanuts was first and foremost, and so I think it just kind of filtered. It's part of my blood. I don't know. I was only allowed to take one Peanuts book at a time out from the library when I was a kid, because otherwise I'd take a whole lot of them. But that kind of familiarity as as a part of just as a whatever, just that. I mean, it's a part of my kind of learning about comics and putting it all together from the start.
I think for me, I'd agree that it was Peanuts was just around everything that you saw, sort of thing. But I did strips, during my political cartooning period. And I studied the way Sparky constructed his scripts, and he clearly worked backwards. And that for me, I mean, I don't know why it took me a year or so to work that out. But to be able to have the annuals and to look at them and go, yeah, I can see how you construct it, how that works. But also, I think if you are involved in this business, I think you actually consume everything, don't you? I mean, I've got to my left here shelves and shelves of books by cartoonists, comic creators, photographers, filmmakers, etc., etc. And don't we all just consume this stuff, to eventually develop your own style? Question. No? It's just me then.
Yeah, no.
Well, but you come across certain things, or you pick and choose certain things that get into you deeper or not.
You don't go exploring for it. You don't go exploring.
Oh, well, yeah. But,
okay.
Okay, well, Gemma, did you want to add, or Ian?
Gemma, you go first.
For me, my first toy that I was ever given when I was a baby was a Snoopy toy. My dad and his siblings grew up in the 70s when Snoopy was so hugely popular. So my grandma's house was full of like Snoopy stuff and Peanuts stuff. So I would just read the books and see all the merchandise. I think that's one of the things that inspired me to kind of make my own merchandise, was just seeing how well Charles Schulz did it. I've always just loved the application of characters onto products, like Ellen's lunchbox in Rocksteady.
That was the slide that, look, I have it right next to me. The slide that Gemma Gemma is talking about, that's, I don't know if you can see, there we go. That's it's a metal lunchbox where I keep my medications. Now it's partly that there's just that childhood familiarity, and it's kind of friendly. I mean, that's part of my advice, to keep your, if you take medications, to keep them in something that's and convenient and that you like, so that it's something that's not just a kind of getting that it's not just a clinical task, but something that you can embrace. And I guess I would say, you know, I had a Peanuts lunchbox when I was a kid, and having that kind of a familiar association is I mean, I guess a twice daily part of what I do now.
Great. So another question we have is, do you think therapists can and should use mental health content in comics with our clients?
Shall I go first? I think you mean, should therapists use cartoons with clients, or comics, or recommend comics?
I think so, yes.
Should we just say yes? Yes.
Well, it's complex. It's complex. It's complex. It's there are some really good. They should definitely. Yeah, I mean, they should definitely read Rocksteady. They should definitely recommend Rocksteady. What I was going to say was that there are some really good books that out there that are designed to be self-help. I suppose also the one that I frequently recommend is Anxiety is Really Strange, by Steve Haynes and Sophie Standing. But there are an awful lot of books out there on mental health that are not, that it's hard to kind of recommend. I think are brilliant, but it's hard to recommend them because they're not really meant to be self-help. A lot of graphic novels are put out there as a form of, their art, their self-expression. They're not designed to be self-help. So it's a complex question. You have to be really careful, I think. There are some out there that you wouldn't, recommend, but definitely if you find ones that you really like and you can, recommend to patients, it's great to have a ready number of books that you can recommend.
I'll add to that graphic medicine isn't just books, and it isn't just personal stories. Like Gemma, I think you have some prints that, like prints, for example, that can be like maybe hung on a wall, or like stickers that people can kind of have on their own, and that would be graphic medicine too. And then some, look, I have another thing to show. It can be, so this is it's a comic that I did for the Washington Post on how to wash your hands. And so part of what comics can do is to make it more visually appealing, like it makes you want to read something. And then another thing that I did, this was after I read an article by Atul Gawande, who does medical writing for the New Yorker, and he said that surgeons just don't wash their hands adequately. Sometimes it's just because they can't remember the whole thing. And certainly that's been an issue with COVID, and people not washing their hands adequately. And I mean, like, how much that has to do with COVID, but certainly now, and what we're doing, but certainly with keeping healthy, washing your hands is one of the biggest things. So comics can be accessible and kind of, I want to say seductive, like they make you want to read them, and then very clear. What I did with this was I gave names to all of the different positions. I made them a little funny, and there's a story that goes along with, like the villain sees the spiders doing these different things, and it helped. Comics help people connect and remember. And so whether it's a book, and there are plenty of books, like Ian was saying, there are plenty of books that would be helpful for a doctor or other mental health care giver to share. But then also a lot of graphic medicine that isn't even necessarily books.
Yeah, what Ellen was mentioning possibly is the work that I've done for Mental Health America. So it is actually Mental Health Month this month.
Right.
And I've worked with them for a few years on campaigns. The first one that we did, which was very popular, was called Mental Health Feels Like. And I really enjoyed working on that because I've only really written about myself. And this was actually crowdsourcing from people online talking about what their particular mental illness or what mental health felt like to them. And I think like stuff like that can be really useful for therapists to work with their clients, as long as they make it clear that it's not black and white. These are a range of experiences, and there are yet still others which, you know, you can't get them all down. You know, you can go on WebMD and there's a list of symptoms of depression or anxiety or whatever, but there are so many more. Not everyone experiences mental illness the same way, and I think that's one of the most important things to remember.
Right. So we have another question. How did you find your style of drawing, and how does one deal with the frustration of trying to get what you see in your mind on paper?
You give up.
No.
Nah. You know what I tell my students who are really seeking, I want to find my drawing style, is to just do it, that it's not really a conscious decision of this is what my drawing style is going to be, but just draw. And I have a wide range of styles, and that was something that I thought was going to be confusing when I first started, and it's not. It's all me, and there's more connections than I realized. So just draw, and like don't worry. I would say don't worry about the style. Just like drawing when you feel like you don't know how to get down what it is that you're feeling is I would say just do it and keep practicing. And then another thing is that if there is anyone's work that you really connect with, that you can try copying and try drawing like what they do, and allow them to be kind of a teacher, a suggestion, and see if maybe if you connect with a particular aspect of that you can explore in whatever it is that you're trying to get down.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, but I'd add into it that don't just look at contemporaries or even people from the last 50 years. Go back and look at people like Daumier, Hogarth and Gilray and all these people way back, and you will find that, and they did comics. These are people who did comics. And also look at filmmakers, you know, all these people like Truffaut and Fellini and people like that, they were all cartoonists and comic creators. And as I was saying, you know, don't be frightened to copy and, you know, really study this stuff, because when you walk away from the copy and try doing it again, more of you will come out. And the more you do it, the less that you will be drawing like Harvey Kurtzman or someone, the more that you will be processing and doing it yourself. And the other thing is, always walk around with a notebook and a pencil, always. So don't take photographs on your iPhone, draw it.
Or you can just take photographs on your iPhone and draw it at home. Just saying.
And then copy them, yeah. And then copy them.
No. It's something about being in public and doing it in public, because if you want your work to go out there into the big bad world, you have to be prepared for the public to react for it and also against it. So yeah, no, I draw.
And there are also courses available and very good books on how to, you know, the art of cartooning. So if you look at books by Linda Barry, Ivan Brunetti, Scott McCloud, you know, there's a load of good information. But I think that, you know, with regards to how to get the idea from inside your head and onto the paper, there's a lot of experimentation involved. And I think that one of the great strengths of cartoonists is finding original ways of translating their reality or their perception or their experience into entertaining kind of ways of representing that on paper. And that's one of the great joys of reading, you know, looking at cartoons, reading graphic novels, is you know, constantly being amazed at how that cartoonist thought of that idea. You know, how do they get that idea there? And you know, I don't know how other people do it, but it is a kind of, you know, it is a process of kind of experimenting, really doodling and trying to find something new, a new way of articulating it.
And to go ahead and draw it for yourself too. It doesn't immediately have to be like, you know, like I'm going to take out this piece of a very emotional thing and I'm going to draw it, you know, to show someone else immediately. I know I did a lot of drawing. I do a lot of drawing for myself. I do a lot of drawing in my journals, and that's where I can really figure out, you know, the different kinds of ways that, oh, this would actually be good vocabulary to share with someone else, or like this probably just for me, you know, like it gets at it, but I don't think anybody else would understand that. And just kind of playing with it on your own is another important aspect. Doing your own personal work and maybe not worrying about it getting published, as well as thinking about if you are doing it as a story, as a way to communicate to other people. It's almost a different way of thinking about your task.
Yeah, the zine world is really helpful for that, isn't it? So you can do something just for yourself and, you know, produce half a dozen or something like that, and put them out like that. What I was also going to say is don't just look at Anglophile society, you know, look at the Europeans. They have a totally different take on how to string together a comic. Obviously the Japanese do, the Chinese are starting to come through, the Africans, they've got amazing comics, the Indians, you know, they're all, because of their cultural context, they're creating different ways of using essentially the same format. It's fascinating.
Great. So we have another question of, do you draw comics for just yourself that you don't share or that aren't shown with the audience?
Yes. I think that's having a sketchbook or a notebook is so important. My work comes naturally out of journaling, so kind of my whole life is just taking things in, writing them down, drawing them, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't become anything. It's literally am I getting my thoughts down on paper. Sometimes they don't really make any sense. Sometimes I might later look at it and get something out of it. It's not always like immediate. And I think that especially with social media, it can seem like an artist is just drawing something, it's going on social media immediately, and people don't see the thought process and the time sometimes between the thought and the image and the text.
Yeah, I would say a lot of my comics, a lot of my combining words and pictures, I would say that a lot of it isn't even comics per se, unless, you know, but draw like in my journal, like drawing how I feel is kind of easier than writing about it, but it's really sloppy. It's not, you know, it's for me, sometimes it's something that happened during my day. Sometimes it's just, you know, somebody, you know, like I'm texting with someone and they tell me something funny and I do a really quick, impressively quick comic and, you know, like, and text it to them. But a lot of stuff doesn't make it even to other people. I think especially when you're doing really personal work, to know that it's okay to be private with what it is that you're doing. It's really important. It really helps you kind of explore different issues, to just know that it's okay. It's okay not to put everything out there. I mean, yeah.
I'd say that it's also with, if somebody is aspiring to doing graphic fiction, just ordinary stories. I mean, I know that we all have filing cabinets full of files, full of things that didn't go further. And that's going to be the same with a straight narrative story that didn't quite click, but I'm going to hang on to it because maybe in 5 years' time, I'll go, oh, yeah, the light bulb moment.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and there is definitely one of my books of daily comics that I did that are sloppy, and most of them are boring, is full of little Post-its for things that I might develop in the future.
Yeah.
I do a lot of, I just doodle a lot, and a lot of my doodles don't make any sense to me at all. And I have no idea where they come from, and they're just completely abstract or just kind of ridiculous kind of things happening to characters that I have no idea who the character is. So, and goodness knows, I don't know where it comes from. It's just kind of.
You thought about seeing a psychiatrist?
Well, weirdly, when I was in medical school, when I was doing my psychiatry block, when we were in a tutorial and I was doodling, and the psychiatrist leaned over and sort of picked the paper up and had a look at it and just sort of went, and then handed it back and didn't really sort of say anything, like sort of just
that really made your day, didn't it?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have time for any other questions other than one last one, even though we've had some really good ones come through. And the last one is, what is your favorite Peanuts character?
Pigpen. Just as I kind of like the concept of a kid that sort of just attracts dust and sort of is perpetually dirty even when he gets clean.
Spike, Snoopy, I guess. When I was a kid, it went back and forth between Snoopy and Woodstock, so I'd have to stick with Snoopy.
And Brick, your favorite is Woodstock?
Woodstock. Yeah.
Great. Well, I just wanted to say thank you all. You've been an amazing group today. I feel like I've learned so much and maybe gotten some hope for future drawing myself. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of the viewers, and it was so great talking with all of you. Yeah.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in.
And just for all of our audience out there, if you want to see future events, you can log on schultzmuseum.org. Otherwise, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.